I regretfully got an apartment with what is, in my opinion, the worst landlord ever. This man, I will call entitled Dick or ED, has the audacity to call himself a good person in court. Let me fill you in. I got an apartment shortly after being released from prison, happy that someone was gonna give me a chance to improve my life. This was clearly not the case. All was well for the first few months. Then winter hit and the heat went out. It took 3 days to get ED to even answer his phone. By that time, his voicemail was full of complaints from his freezing cold tenants. He told me the law gave him reasonable time to fix it. We went 2 more weeks with no heat using our stoves and camping in the kitchen in our respective apartments. When ED got his electricity bill, he attempted to raise the rent on the apartments. Obviously, he was not allowed by the city, so he refused to pay his electricity bill, thus denying all of us heat at all. This is where my OCD kicked in and I went full research mode. I studied every law in regards to federal, state, and city landlord-tenant laws and rights. I found so many violations it was no longer funny but scary. I studied building code. I studied the condition of all of his apartments. This was easier due to the fact I was either friends with his tenants or had gone there to repair damages caused by frozen pipes and electrical outlets failing due to shoddy wiring and so forth. ED had pissed off all of his tenants. Every last one was pissed to the point where they wanted to testify against him in court, but couldn't due to the financial hardships the living conditions we were in had been causing. I formulated a plan to get him to repair the buildings he owned. But ED had his own plan. January 2nd at 2 a.m. I was awoken by the smoke detectors in the whole building going off. I quickly ran to the back hall because no smoke was in my apartment yet, but I was on the top floor. I opened the door and was greeted by a thick wall of smoke. I quickly ran downstairs after shouting for my GF at the time to get out of the house quick. I pounded on every door and screamed fire. I got as many people as possible to evacuate, but the floor with the fire no one was answering, and to my knowledge contained children. So I panicked. At this point the fire department was there and began breaking in doors. I evacuated. After the fire was out and the investigation had started, I witnessed ED give the tenant of that apartment's sister an envelope containing an undisclosed amount of cash, which was visible to anyone nearby. 2 weeks later, the results were released. Arson. The tenant had used hairspray to start the fire and hid the evidence in a hole she punched into the wall. The very person who had been given money by the landlord. Ironically, she was the only tenant who had paid rent in the whole building because she had started moving in 2 days prior. I had not known she was now a tenant, and her sister and kids had moved out the day before. I looked at ED and told him I know what he had done, and I was not going to rest until he lost all his buildings. I then began asking his tenants for their stories about their interaction with ED. This is where things got real. He had been accused of everything from ripping off employees, theft, grand theft auto, bank fraud, and so much more. I formulated a new plan. I sucked up to him and made it known I am a computer tech. ED had a few broken computers and some printer and network issues. I was in. We worked a deal on payment for back rent. I knew he was not good for his word, but it was all part of the plan. Once I got his passwords and logins, I copied his entire HDD to my portable one. I copied all emails in his business account and printed his financial records on my Wi-Fi printer, which was next door. After I fixed his computers and network, I then went home to review my newfound evidence. It was enough. More than enough. I contacted code enforcement with all of the violations of code for every building, including the illegal electrical installation in his new office without permits or even an electrician. He was immediately investigated. That night I found a 7-day notice to quit on my door. My roommate was worried, but I filled him in on the plan. Remember, I studied all those laws and rights. Well, we get to court, and I open with, Your Honor, I have proof of a clear violation of the Warranty of Habitability Act. The eviction was thrown out, and he was forced to repair my apartment with me still in it immediately. The next month I was given another eviction notice. Still, he is losing money due to the fact I was teaching his tenants landlord-tenant rights and the laws associated with it. ED kept losing his court dates and kept being told to fix stuff and was continuously fined by the courts and the code enforcement. He was sinking fast. Back to that fire, the woman living there was arrested for arson and charged with 2 counts due to the accidental electrical fire on New Year's Day turned out to be ruled intentional. So the hairspray was in reality attempt 2. He was under investigation for conspiracy to arson and other charges. I wasn't done yet. We went to court again for my non-payment of rent. I won again based on the Landlord Retaliation Act because I had contacted code enforcement and can prove this blatant retaliation, and the judge didn't even listen to ED. Needless to say, spending the winter without heat took a toll on us tenants. We bought electric heaters and informed the power company that the landlord had shut off all the power to all this building and was requiring the tenants to pay for their own power. Well, apparently his illegal wiring caught up to him. He had wired apartments to run off each other, and the common areas were now attached to wiring in every apartment. This put ED in a rough position, as local law says it's the landlord's responsibility to supply power to all common areas. This means his shoddy workmanship and illegal wiring prevents him from legally disconnecting the power. The power company turned on all the power and locked his ability to shut it off until the wiring of common areas was repaired and separated from the apartments. This would cost thousands we knew he didn't have. ED was panicking. He kept losing in court. People were legally withholding rent. He couldn't shut off services, and the fines were debilitating. He kept blaming his tenants and refused to repair things. One by one, the buildings were condemned, and ED was required to pay for relocation of his tenants by law. Well, he didn't. He couldn't. He was arrested for attempting to sell 3 buildings the city confiscated from him, and for selling one that was condemned. ED got what he deserved. He lost every building he owned, got charged with all kinds of fraud, and was investigated for other crimes I am still unaware of. But I wasn't done. He caused a lot of suffering. I gave his financial records to the IRS with all the internal memos and everything I got from his computers. Also, I provided the local authorities and code enforcement with the same things. ED was so screwed. I have since gotten a new apartment, and everything he owned has been taken by the city, state, and IRS. I have not seen ED in 3 years, and all of his properties have been bought by someone new, repaired, and have all new tenants who are happy with their new landlords. The old tenants got better places with decent landlords. And what about our wonderful entitled Dick? He is serving multiple sentences for the crimes he has committed and is already not getting out anytime soon, yet the investigations are not done and the charges keep coming. ED is somewhere in some prison regretting meeting this tenant. Moral: don't be an ED unless you want to meet the moral enforcer.
Next story.
I would like to start off by saying that when I get angry, I get furious. My sister calls it Hulk mode, where I get huge doses of adrenaline. My rage does not mix well with the fact I don't mind watching people suffer. I'm not saying I'm a bad guy. I help people when I can. But if someone does me or someone I care about wrong, I enjoy their pain with little to no remorse. Anyway, on to the story. I am pretty much the unofficial caretaker of my youngest sister. Let's call her Ella's little sister. I'm 17 and she is 6, but as her big brother and me looking around early to mid-20s, I'm constantly mistaken as her dad. I always walk her to and from school. Her elementary school is about 3 blocks from the high school. I do schooling online. So there are constantly kids my age walking by our house. Now, I love my Ellis more than anything in the world, and am very protective of her. We love playing together and building snowmen in winter. This is exactly when the incident took place. We live in Indiana, so we get some crazy snow. We were building a snow person family while I, the big strong brother, would pretty much stack the snowmen on top of each other, while Ellis balled them up. I never leave Ellis alone outside for more than a few seconds, and always keep an eye on her. We have a fenced-in yard, so it should be fine, right? Me. Keep playing. I'll go get some hot cocoa. LS. YAAYY. QPOS. A kid I knew well, but never had the pleasure of meeting. As I make the hot chocolate, I hear Ella's crying. I just figured one of the 4 snowmen fell over or something like that. Me. The less. Calm down and come here. The hot cocoa is ready. She doesn't come and doesn't stop crying. But then I hear laughing. I step outside, freezing cold with no coat. There were 3 kids, all around my age. We will call the one I knew from school SH1, Shbean for shithead. The others will be 2 and 3. The snowmen were destroyed, sticks and scarves thrown everywhere. But that wasn't important. SH1. Well, isn't it Humpty Dumpty? Is this your dad? Asking LS. LS doesn't answer, and I guess SH1 doesn't like that. He pushes my LS down with a strike to the face. Her nose all red, she falls and hits her head on the sidewalk and starts screaming. Blood coming from the back of her head. At first my heart stopped. My first thought and biggest fear was brain damage. I rushed over to LS and tried to pick her up to take her inside and call an ambulance. SH1, 2, and 3 had walked up behind me without me noticing. I was too distracted. As I started to lift her, SH2 grabbed my arms, causing me to drop LS, luckily into the soft snow this time. Me. Let go of me, you mofo, she is hurt. As SH2 held me, SH3 picked up a pile of snow and just piled it on my LS face. By now my LS wasn't screaming, it was a weak whimper, and I was so scared she was going to die. Black. Most people say they see red or time slows, but not me. I knew exactly what I was doing, but it was like I was watching it on TV. I bit SH2 on the thumb, drawing blood. He yells as he lets go and jumps back. I lunge forward. Now, I'm fat. I'm 6 on the dot and about 330 elves. But I have also played football my whole life and knew how to use my size. I slam into SH3 as hard as I could, taking him to the ground. I was on top of him and was bringing the hammer down. I don't really know how many times I hit him, but he lost teeth, shattered his nose, and lost eyesight in one eye. My knuckles were shredded raw, but I had so much adrenaline in me I didn't feel it. In fact, the only reason I stopped was because I heard a thump. I didn't really hear it. I felt it. Then I felt liquid trickle down the back of my head. Blood. SH1 had hit me over the head with a brick. Now this hurt after the fight. But again, when I have adrenaline pumping through me, I feel no tearing. I charged at him as he raised the brick again. He must not have expected my speed with my size, because he jumped back and hesitated. I didn't. I slammed him into my dad's truck, parked on the roadside. He dropped the brick, and I punched him in the gut. He bent over, and I lifted my knee to meet with his face. He falls to the ground. I pick up the brick. I walk beside him and put it on the sidewalk. I put his hand on the brick. No resistance from him. I stomped as hard as I could. He screamed, louder than anything I've heard. I do the same with his other hand. SH2, after seeing his buddies pummeled, ran. Turns out he called the cops and said I killed his friends. I walked over to Ella's, who was breathing, but it was weak. I called an ambulance, but the only thing I muttered was she's hurt and our address. When I hang up, I pass out. I woke up handcuffed to a hospital bed, not knowing what happened. Apparently I broke multiple bones in both my hands and needed stitches on the back of my head. My Ellis was fine. She had just lost a lot of blood. SH1, 2, and 3, not so lucky. The only thing I did to SH2 was bite his thumb. I guess I didn't know that I almost bit his thumb off. SH1 had serious hand injuries, needing multiple hand surgeries on each one. I later found out he lost 3 fingers and can't use his right hand. But SH3 got the worst of it. He lost his sense of smell, lost eyesight in one eye, bit a hole in his tongue, fractured his jaw, lost multiple teeth, fractured his skull, and had major swelling on the brain in which he barely survived by the skin of his teeth, at least the ones he has left. After a bit, a nurse came and checked on me, saw I was awake, and went to get a cop. The cop came in and asked me a bunch of questions, and I told the truth. I don't know. It was black. He then uncuffed me from the bed and said that they watched our security cameras, and while a bit excessive, I acted in self-defense of myself and others. Some might ask how I can describe the fight so well if it was all black, unreal like watching TV. Another good question would be about the beginning, where I said I enjoyed others suffering if they deserved it. To answer both those questions, I have the security recording. The police took the footage from the monitor, but the camera also gets sent to our phones. I love watching it. I've probably watched it 1,000,000 times. I only have 2 regrets about the whole ordeal. I let SH2 get away with only a small injury. My last regret. I don't think they suffered enough. The footage showed the fight lasted less than 1.5 minutes. I wish it would have been hours.
Next story.
I was a witness to this a long time ago, and the results were learned of by word of mouth. Once upon a time, there was a kid. Let's call him Marco. Marco was your everyday kid, a little skinny. I remember him being slightly geeky. If you left your pens unattended, he'd disassemble them before you turned back around in your seat at times. He was nice, polite, and fairly helpful. This was middle school. One day, though, he does it to a bully. Let's call him Polo. Polo is huge, but with fat. He looks like if you drilled 3 holes into him. A giant could use him for bowling. He's not nice. He's not handsome. He's got a posse of equally disgusting friends who all gang up together to bully others. I suspect that if they hadn't ganged up with each other, they would have been bullied. Perhaps they had been in the past and got a taste of power over others when they ganged up. I don't know. I kept to myself. One day, I see Marco with a swollen eye and wet hair. He's limping a bit too, and his backpack is ripped. I ask him what the hell happened. Turns out Polo threw him into a bathroom stall by his backpack, which ripped. The toilet got him in the knee, and Polo shoved his face into the water, bashing his eye into the seat. I ask why Polo had done this to him, and he says I took his pen apart. It was just a BIC crystal, or some cheap pen like that. Things escalate over the next few weeks. Eventually, Marco has to take time off when Polo strips him naked in the bathroom except for his boxers and makes him shove them into the toilets. The school, being full of your typical assholes, tries to expel Marco for damage to school property and does nothing to Polo. This is stopped by video evidence of the gang leaving the bathroom, laughing and rifling through Marco's backpack, then tossing it in the trash. When Marco comes back, he's different. He's not happy. He's quiet, subdued. He doesn't talk to anyone, and bruises magically appear on him between classes. He withdraws into himself and begins to look positively skeletal. Of course, no one at the school does anything except the one nice jock. He comes across Polo stealing Marco's backpack and folds Polo into a trash can. Of course, he's suspended, but does it again when he comes back. The teachers give up on suspending the jock after his parents threaten to sue. The fact that someone bothered to stand up for him, though, seems to have given life back to Marco. He starts opening back up and putting weight back on, which is very good. One day, though, he's wearing a scarf. A very special, beautiful knitted scarf. His grandfather had knit it for him. Yes, grandfather, before he died. Polo steals it and comes back the next day with a bag of ashes, handing it to Marco. He laughs hysterically. Marco comes back the next day with a backpack full of sugar-free Haribo gummy bears. Polo, being the glutton that he is, steals every single bag of bears and eats them by the fistful throughout the day. Marco cries, but I remember something in his sobs didn't quite reach his eyes. Near the end of the school day, Polo lurches out of the classroom and bolts for the bathroom. He doesn't come back the next day, or the next. Someone says they saw blood in the bathroom. Polo comes back a few days later with an eye patch and mottled, fading bruising all across his face. I believe it's called petechia. He's permanently blind in his left eye, and the bruising makes him look like a ripening fruit for as long as it lasts. He's in and out of school for doctor's appointments for a while. He didn't mess with Marco again, and instead became very introverted and quiet. The reports of blood in the toilet of the bathroom he went to were never confirmed, but it's quite likely.